Hello and welcome to the November AWS Canberra User Group. You'll notice that I'm not Brian. So Brian this week is our genius presenter and DJ who will be scheduling our new format of talks. So really looking forward to getting some feedback from you on how this new format goes. This month we'll have a bunch of the regulars. We'll have a bunch of things that have come out new this month, so a number of online training updates that will be of interest, as well as our new white papers. And tonight we'll have 3 presentations, not just one. So we're trialling our new lightning talk format, and our 3 talks this evening will be on ISM Conformance Packs, a brief introduction to Bottlerocket, as well as our Gateway Load Balancer service, which has just been released as well. As always, we have a YouTube channel, so please tell your friends, go to the page and subscribe. I would love to get some more people subscribed so we can get our long-awaited custom URL. It will happen one day. So please hit that subscribe button, and you can also catch all the old episodes there from times gone by. In terms of what's new this month, it's been a huge month. So we have released, at this stage, probably more in the last few minutes, 294 releases this month. This is a very, very big month, and it's made my job this month pleasantly challenging to try and pick the ones to tell you about. But because we are data-driven and we love graphs, this is what it looks like. And the delta between the number of releases that we had during reInvent last year and this month is only 8. So it's really, really picked up, and it means we've got a very exciting few weeks ahead of us for reInvent. In terms of what's new, so a few things have arrived in Sydney this month that are of interest to people. So these aren't new services, but they've just been released in the Sydney region. The first of those is Kendra, our intelligent enterprise search service powered by machine learning. So if you need to build an intelligent enterprise search app, you can now do that out of Sydney, which is great. Also, SageMaker Studio has made it here, which is our web-based IDE for your entire machine learning workflow and all of the tasks related, from notebooks all the way through to model deviation and stuff. November 11 was AWS Storage Day, and on that day we had a whole pile of service releases there, and I've linked to the blog at the bottom of the page here to go and explore the rest of them, but I've cherry-picked a few of those this month. The first of those is Storage Lens, which is a way to give an organisational view of your object storage used and the trends, and getting that at the organisational level, which for a lot of customers will be very useful insights to have. The second one is around Amazon S3 object ownership. For those people that need this, they will be knowing and celebrating that this is now a thing. But it allows you to take ownership of objects as they land in your S3 buckets, and for some people that required a bit of code to manage previously. Data Sync also now allows you to automatically transfer billions of files or objects from your different file systems or data stores into another automatically without provisioning infrastructure. So for example, you might have your FSX file system that you want to replicate into another region, or perhaps you want the files out of your FSX file share to be moved into S3 for data processing for other uses like machine learning or data and analytics. That's now all very, very easy to do with no infrastructure to provision, as I said. EC2 has had a big month, and it's each of these topics kind of warrants a bigger talk than just this, but AWS Nitro Enclaves, if anyone is dealing with sensitive data and needing to process sensitive data, this is a topic that's well worth diving into, and I can't do it justice in a few seconds. In the training resources later on that I'll show you, there is a level 400 deep dive on this available, and I highly recommend having a look at that and understanding a bit more about that. It allows you to process really sensitive data in a hardened and secure way, powered by our Nitro hypervisor. It's really, really cool. The new P4D instances, they're our new GPU-powered instance type, running the latest NVIDIA A100 tensor cores, and they're deployed in ultra clusters which have a number of really impressive metrics, including cloud-first 400 gigabit networking, and they're deliver the best performance for high-performance compute and machine learning training workloads, and a number of those metrics lead it to have 60% more cost efficiency for training tasks, and significantly improved performance when compared to the previous generation. In terms of networking, a couple of really interesting new services have arrived this month. The first of those is our Gateway Load Balancer, which you will hear a lot more about in a few minutes from Steve, but it allows you to deploy third-party firewall or appliances in a really, really improved, scalable and automated way. So Steve will dive into detail about that. The network firewall is, it's not in Sydney yet, but it has the ability for you to do inspection of traffic between your VPCs and in and out of your VPCs. Really easy way to do some packet filtering on the traffic in your environment, and it will scale to meet your network throughput as you need as well, so it's incredibly scalable. The last one here around AWS backup and organizations. Cross-account backup is a feature that allows you to protect from a couple of use cases that we used to deploy in a data bunker scenario you may have heard of before. So it allows you to take data from one account and escrow it into another account, and that protects you from accidental or malicious deletion, or if your account's been compromised, it gives you that secondary account to go into and recover your data from. So it's a very, very powerful way for mitigating things like risks of trusted insiders. For data and analytics people, there's a couple of new services. One only arrived today, which is Amazon Managed Workflows for Apache Airflow, which is kind of challenging to say quickly. So that will give you a new service that will orchestrate Apache Airflow workflows and allows you to build data processing pipelines end-to-end really, really easily in the cloud. And Glue Data Brew is a visual data preparation tool. So it can allow you to process data using 250 predetermined transformations, and lets you do it sort of up to 80% faster in a nice, easy to use interface in the console. And lastly, for all the serverless people, the AWS Lambda extensions now make it really easy to integrate with third-party services like your Datadogs and your Splunks to emit logs. And we've got a number of launch partners, but it means that the integration with that is much, much simpler now. And if you've written a bunch of code to manage this before, I highly recommend you take a look at that. The last in the what's new this month is a number of services that are probably going to be underrepresented. I like to think of them as the nice little releases that just make our life that bit easier. So AWS SSO has released a couple of features that just mean you can now support multi-factor authentication much more easily. So AWS SSO will now support both U2F devices, so your YubiKeys and those sorts of USB security keys, as well as the Touch ID on your MacBook and things like that. And it will also allow you to have users self-service their MFA during the logon process, which previously can be a time-consuming exercise for people to go through and set up. Security Hub is now integrated with AWS organizations. So previously you would have had a script that you've had to run or some kind of automation to automatically enroll accounts into Security Hub during your account creation process. That's now far simpler and integrated nicely with organizations in much the same way as GuardDuty has been for a while. AWS Trusted Advisor has also now integrated a bit more nicely with organisations, and it gives you an organisational level of the best practice recommendations that Trusted Advisor provide you. So if you're on business or enterprise support, this gives you a nicely consolidated view of your entire environment in terms of the Trusted Advisor recommendations. In terms of training, we've got, as always, AWS.training is a vast resource of training material for you, but I thought I'd call out a few this month that have come out of the What's New feed, including a deep dive on identity and access management. So there's a number of ways to improve and gain some more skills in AWS. And lastly, I mentioned it before, but our online tech talks have now gone and turned into an on-demand library. So there's a big array of videos spread up into a number of categories, and one example of that is our Nitro Enclaves talk that I was mentioned before. There's a deep dive on that available there. In terms of white papers this month, a couple of, well, as always, a lot of white papers have come out, but if you are an application developer, the security overview of API Gateway and the using service meshes on AWS white papers might be of interest. And for those who are in the hybrid cloud space, the reference architecture for outposts as well as the new hybrid cloud with AWS white paper will both be of interest for you. As always, the aws.amazon.com/whitepapers to find the latest ones of those. And with that, I will pass over to our first talk, which will be James Kingsmill, and he's going to talk about the ISM Conformance Pack. And we're just going to, we'll be back in a minute, we're just going to swap over speakers on this end.
Hey everyone, my name's James Kingsmill and I'm a solution architect at AWS. It's great to be here with you tonight. I'm going to be talking with you about ISM Conformance Packs. Conformance Packs for ISM and Essential 8. This is a really exciting new feature that we just released to the console this month. It's directly relevant to public sector customers in Australia, so it's really exciting. So how do you know if this talk's relevant for you? One, if you use the ISM. How do you know if you use the ISM? If you're an Australian federal public sector customer, you almost certainly use the ISM. Even if you're not Australian public sector, if you use some kind of compliance regime, there's a whole lot of crossover here with other different compliance programs. So there are conformance packs also for programs like APRA or NIST or CIS and a whole lot more. And then finally, if you just want better visibility of your compliance or security posture, this is going to be really relevant for you. So just to start off with, we have to go through a few TLAs, a few three-letter acronyms. And if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Canberran, these might be very familiar to you. To start off with, the ACSC, this is the government agency that leads the improvement of cybersecurity across government and across the private sector as well. The ISM is the Information Security Manual. This is the cybersecurity framework that is owned and maintained by the ACSC, and it's used to protect systems and information from cyber attacks. And then finally, we've got IRAP. This is a program for doing independent assessments according to the ISM framework. So let's move on to what are conformance packs. So conformance pack is a collection of AWS config rules. And what's a config rule? An AWS config rule does dynamic compliance checking on your AWS resources. So for example, it could be all your S3 buckets encrypted in your account, or do all your EC2 instances have the right tags associated with them? Is port 22 closed across all your security groups? It can do dynamic compliance checking across those kinds of questions across all your AWS resources. So the conformance pack for ISM does a mapping of ISM controls to AWS config rules. So for example, the ISM has controls around encryption of data at rest, and there are plenty of sample config rules that look at this across, for example, S3, DynamoDB, RDS. And so this is a really a quick way to establish a common baseline for best practices across multiple accounts in an easy and scalable way. So there are a few things to keep in mind with this. Conformance packs aren't designed to ensure your compliance. They're not designed to do that. They don't do that. What they are designed to do is to help you get visibility over your compliance and security posture. They cover a subset of the ISM, but it's not completely 100% comprehensive. And the important thing to remember here is that compliance remains the responsibility of the customer. So if you remember the shared responsibility model, and if you've been to a security talk at AWS anytime before, you surely would have heard of the shared responsibility model. Customers are responsible for their security in the cloud. AWS remains responsible for maintaining the security of the cloud. Another thing that's going to be really important is this documentation. So if you decide to use the ISM Conformance Pack, this is going to be really important. This gives you the mapping between ISM controls and AWS config rules. And I'll dig into that a little bit deeper later, but I wanted to give you a kind of an outline of what it looks like. So here it is on the page. ISM control 0459 says, encryption software used for data at rest implements full disk encryption, etc., etc. The important thing here is that it's about full disk encryption for data at rest. The ISMC pack, the conformance pack, links that control with a number of different config rules, one of which is CloudTrail encryption enabled. We want our CloudTrail logs to be encrypted. That's a good thing. And so it links that ISM control with that config rule, and it also links it with guidance that's specific to that config rule to explain why it's important. So to get started if you want to use the ISM Conformance Pack, you've got to turn on AWS config recording first of all. And there's a walkthrough when you start config for the first time that helps you enable this. It requires you either to create an S3 bucket or to point config at an existing bucket. You need to create or use an existing IAM role for the AWS config service, and that to allow that the service to read and write from that bucket. So what does this actually look like? Let's hop into the console and actually see what this thing looks like in practice. So here we are on the AWS console, and I'm going to start us off in North Virginia, and I'll tell you why in a second. So if I go to the config service and point here, I haven't set this up in US East 1 yet, so this is going to give you a look of what the service looks like before you set it up. So here you can click Get Started, and it'll run you through a little wizard to help you get started. You can choose whether you want to record all resources supported in the region, or maybe you want to specify specific resources, like an API gateway stage. So I want to record all resources. I want to include global resources, like IAM resources. I can specify an S3 bucket, create a new bucket, or specify an existing one. And I can choose an IAM role for the config service. So I won't do that now. What I'll do instead is hop over to the Sydney region, where if you're deploying an ISM Conformance Pack, this is probably going to be most relevant to you. So here is the config dashboard, and you can see conformance packs here on the left. Let's hop in here and have a look at the conformance packs that we've got. I've already got a couple deployed. I've got one for NIST and one for ACSC ISM. Let's have a look, though, at what it looks like to deploy a new conformance pack. So if I click Deploy, I choose Use Sample Template, and I go here and I can choose the ACSC ISM sample template or the Essential 8 sample template. And it's important to understand here, both of these sample templates are exactly the same. They're both addressing the controls in the ISM. We've just had customers who are looking for the ISM for compliance and customers who are looking for the Essential 8. So to kind of help discoverability on that front, we included both of those in the sample templates. So I choose ACSC ISM. I click Next. I call it ISM Test. I hit Next, and that's it. I can go ahead and deploy my conformance pack. I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm going to cancel out of this, and let's look into the conformance pack that I've already got deployed. So you can see that I've got a bunch of non-compliant resources. This is my development account. That's okay. That's expected. I've also got a couple of compliant resources. So in this case, it's looking at multi-region CloudTrail enabled, whether I have CloudTrail enabled across all regions. That's compliant. That's a good thing. Scrolling up to some of the non-compliant resources, we've got SageMaker Notebook no direct internet access. That's fine for me. I'm running a development account. If you were, say, using SageMaker with live data, maybe you would want to limit internet access to mitigate the risk of data exfiltration, say. So in this case, I'm non-compliant, but you might want to be compliant in that case. So one thing that we hear from customers is, what if I don't like one of the particular rules in the conformance pack? Can I change it? Can I add it out? Can I remove it? Can I add a new one? So this is where this documentation that I pointed out before comes really useful. So operational best practices for ACSC ISM. If we scroll down to the bottom here, and you'll see this list of controls and config rules and guidance, and there's a whole lot of things listed here. If I scroll down a little bit further, there is the best practices template available on GitHub. So if I hop in here and make this a little bit bigger, now that's a good size. So what I can do here, this is the template that we're actually deploying on the console when I choose the ISM sample template. So let's go ahead and look at the raw view, and I know that's very small, but give me a second. I'm just going to copy and paste that into VS Code. So let's say, let's open up test.yaml and paste that in. And now if I make this a little bit smaller, let's say I want to not use S3 bucket replication enabled. It's nice to have replication enabled, but say for data sovereignty purposes, I don't want that rule to be included. So what I can do here is just delete that rule and save it. And now if I do an AWS config service put conformance pack, and I'll walk you through that command in a second. Let's try it with the right file name. That'll start deploying. Okay, cool. So I'll walk you through what this command is. So I'm saying AWS, I'm hitting the config service. I'm choosing put conformance pack because I want to create a new conformance pack. I'm giving it a unique name. I'm pointing at the template body, which is a local file called test.yaml. And then I'm also passing in a delivery S3 bucket. And this is a little fiddly as well. So if you can, what you might want to do is set up a new bucket through the console first. And that way you're assured that it has the right permissions, because it can be a little bit fiddly. So that's how you deploy a new kind of customized version of that sample template. If we hop back to the console and go to conformance packs, you can see that it's in progress. So it'll take a few minutes to deploy, but that's how it works to deploy that kind of that customized version. So let's hop back to our slides. So some of the frequently asked questions that we get. Am I compliant if my conformance pack is green? If I go into my conformance pack and it's all green, am I compliant? No. Customers retain responsibility for their compliance. You're not compliant if everything in the console is green. Who says that a particular ISM control is met by a particular AWS config rule? Where does that mapping come from? These mappings were done by AWS Security Assurance Services. There are a bunch of experts in this field. Still, it gives no assurance of your compliance. And then this rule isn't relevant to me. Again, customers can edit the provided templates. So if you go to the conformance pack documentation page, scroll down, look at the GitHub link, that'll take you to a sample template. You can go edit it to your heart's content. Maybe you can even add in custom rules as well using the RDK. There are a bunch of different options there available to you. So next steps, I would say start by turning on AWS config. It's a really useful service. It can really help you with auditing. Number two, deploy the ISM Conformance Pack. Try to add or edit or remove a rule that's in there. And then one thing that we didn't talk about, this is kind of a stretch goal for you if you're interested, you can explore automated remediation. So if a user changes a resource to make it non-compliant, so say in the example that we chose before of S3 buckets not being encrypted, if you enable automated remediation, that can go in there and just automatically remediate that and turn on encryption for that S3 bucket, which is pretty cool. But that's a talk for another time. That's a stretch goal. That automated remediation is a stretch goal if you're interested. And that's a really quick run through of the ISM Conformance Pack. It's been great to chat with you, and I'm going to hand over to our next presenter.
Hello. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about Bottlerocket, which is Linux but less so. First of all, who am I and what the hell business do I have talking to you about anything? I'm Bernard. You might remember me from such AWS user group talks as Kubernetes for the tiny enterprise. Sadly, the company I'm with the company I was with for that talk no longer exists. They didn't survive COVID. I can promise you it wasn't AWS's or Kubernetes' fault. I'm now working at a company called Circles, who do video conferencing and online learning tools. And I'm also, as of a few weeks ago, the maintainer of the EX-AWS library, which is the sort of de facto standard Elixir library for interfacing with AWS. So what's Bottlerocket? Well, if you've ever fired up an EC2 instance, you've almost certainly done it with some Linux variant, Amazon Linux 2, Red Hat, Debian, whatever your poison is. And Linux is awesome. It's all things to all people. It's got all these billions of switches and knobs and dials that you can turn, and it's got a gazillion tools that do all sorts of cool stuff. And that's great if you want to do all that cool stuff. But if you just want to run containers, if you're just running a Kubernetes workload or an ECS workload, you don't want all that cool stuff. All that cool stuff is getting in the way. It's using up compute. It's providing extra avenues for security attacks. It's doing stuff that you don't need and ideally you don't want. So Bottlerocket is Linux for containers. It's simple. or at least it's simple as far as the end user is concerned. The AWS guys have obviously put an enormous amount of work into it. Bottlerocket is just a very basic Linux-derived operating system that gives you what you need to run containers well and nothing else. So what's Bottlerocket actually got? It's got Docker, obviously, because we're running containers. Wouldn't be much use without Docker. It's got an update system. I'll get to that in more detail in a minute. Comes packaged with a basic admin container because sooner or later something's going to go wrong. You're going to want to actually get onto the machine itself. And because we're only running containers, you of course do that via another container. And it doesn't have very much else. It doesn't have printer drivers. It doesn't have graphics drivers. It doesn't have any of the whiz-bang features that Linux loves to have, but that you don't need for running containers. So, as I mentioned, it's got Docker. The Docker configuration that ships with Bottlerocket is pre-configured to work just out of the box with either ECS or EKS. And the configuration, as you'll see in a few minutes, is really, really minimal to get either of these working. It's as close as they could possibly get it to plug and play. It's got an update system, as I mentioned. So anyone who's run Linux has at some point run RPM update or apt-get update or upgrade or pacman-syu or whatever. And it's pulled down 1,000 different packages and kernel images and stuff. And it's gotten halfway through installing them and gone, no, actually, no, that didn't work. Now your install's broken. What you going to do now? Which isn't a great situation for a machine that's running a production workload that you're just trying to upgrade. You just want the new kernel version because there's an important security patch in it. Bottlerocket makes use of a new system, the name of which escapes me and I couldn't find quickly when I was doing these slides today, but it's, I believe, part of Linux, which provides for atomic, reversible, and fully automatic upgrades, automatable upgrades. God, as long as you're using Kubernetes at the moment. ECS is coming soon, they assure us, don't know when. So what do I mean by atomic and reversible? So what it actually does, when it's time to upgrade Bottlerocket, it pulls down a whole new image of itself. So that's the kernel, all your tools, everything else, and it plonks it in a completely separate partition to the currently running partition. And when you're ready to upgrade, it twiddles the bootloader to point at the new one, reboots, and you boot it into your whole new system. All the packages are upgraded, all your kernel images are upgraded, everything. And then, if, God forbid, they've done something wrong and botched that upgrade somehow, you can just twiddle back the bootloader to point to your previously working image, and you're still good to go. So that's the reversible element. And fully automatable, if you're running Kubernetes, there is a Kubernetes, I can't remember what the term is, worker process system thing that AWS will give you, which will automatically perform these updates on a regular basis, reboot your nodes. You don't even have to touch anything anymore. I think it'll even reverse them if it can't boot into the new system. So that's all pretty awesome and takes off removes a massive workload of keeping your system updated and securely patched and everything. And the admin container, which I mentioned before, sooner or later, something's going to go wrong in one of your containers, at least if you're me, and you're going to want to SSH into the machine and actually poke around in the log, see what's going on. So you can optionally spool up one of these admin containers with the rest of the system, SSH into that via, I've called it AWS Connect here and I was corrected earlier, it's called AWS Session Manager. Sorry, AWS people. You can SSH in via AWS Session Manager, get a very basic set of tools. It's got grep, it's got, I think, a very trimmed down version of bash. It's got more but not less, which is a bit of a pain. But if there are tools in there that you really want, you can actually replace it with your own custom built admin container. Stick that in there instead, have that spool up when you ask for the admin container, and you'll have all the tools that you built into it. So that's all pretty sweet. Oops. Why though? Why do we need this? Because it's more efficient, because none of your compute is being used on loading printer drivers, on loading graphics drivers, on loading goodness knows what else comes with Linux these days, but it's a lot. It's more secure because it doesn't have all the bits that it doesn't need, so those don't exist as attack vectors anymore, and your only access to it is through AWS Session Manager. And it's more simpler. There's less to worry about going wrong. If you don't need to think about all these processes that are often running in the background in Linux that could, hey, suddenly have a runaway memory allocation and bring down your whole system. So does it work? Well, yeah. So I started using it in our company not too long after it was officially released. And all I can say is it worked right out of the box, and I've had absolutely zero problems with it. The entirety of the configuration I had to do to get it working were these two lines. So that's the user data that you supply into the EC2 launch configuration. Kubernetes takes, I think, 6 lines, but then it is Kubernetes. If it wasn't more complex, it wouldn't be Kubernetes, really, would it? And so far, we've had zero problems with it. The upgrades work as advertised. The performance is no different as far as we've noticed from our previous EC2 systems, but that's to be expected because we're not really pushing them particularly hard at the moment. It's good. I have no bad things to say about it. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time. Top line there is my company's website and my email address, my GitHub, and if you're an Elixir developer, there's where you can find the AWS libraries that I now maintain. Thanks very much.
And welcome back. I'm Stephen Bridle. I'm one of the Enterprise Cloud Architects for Professional Services in Canberra. And I'm going to be going through the Gateway Load Balancer tonight. So the Gateway Load Balancer, at a glance, I'm going to run through what it looks like, how it can be deployed, and how it can work in your environment. So this has been a big feature release this month, and it's quite helpful for a lot of the customers I work with. So it consists of a couple of components. The first one is the Gateway Load Balancer endpoint. So this will be what you drop into your VPC and you push traffic at. What it will then do is push to the Gateway Load Balancer. The Gateway Load Balancer is an ability to push your traffic to multiple firewall or security appliances. So the Gateway Load Balancer builds on AWS Hyperplane, and if you're not sure what AWS Hyperplane is, have a look back in reInvent, I think it was 2017 with Peter DeSantis. Really goes into a bit of detail there, but what it allows us to do is push that traffic across those VPCs, so you can see there that we're able to horizontally scale the appliances, provide some fault tolerance on those appliances. And a great feature that actually came out in the last few days is with auto scaling, we can now have multiple network interfaces. So for some of our security partners out there, this really allows us to scale out that appliance fleet. It's going to provide that fault tolerance, and it's transparent to our network traffic. So you're not having to do any complex NATs, both incoming and outgoing. It looks transparent, and I'll work through on how it does that. And as I said, it's separate security and user domains. So you can actually run your appliances in a different VPC. It doesn't need to be connected to your transit gateway. It doesn't need to have any VPC peering. It allows you to push that traffic via the endpoint straight over to those load balancers. And it'll allow you to provide that appliance as a service. So we may see some of our other partners provide that gateway service or that security appliance service, and you basically push your your endpoints over to their load balancer. And finally, the deployment. So you're able to create gateway load balancers and an appliance fleet using steps similar to how you set up a network load balancer. You'll send traffic to these appliances by adjusting your route tables, and I'll go through a little bit on what that update to your route table looks like. So why a gateway load balancer is the big one. This is probably a typical network topology that I see at a lot of customers, and the big area that they struggle with is that VPN, typically using something like ECMP or equal cost multipathing to push their traffic from their transit gateway out to the internet. While the VPN will give them that high availability, you are limited in performance. So you're typically going to have to struggle with about a 1.25 gig throughput on each of those sessions. The second bit is you're starting to have to NAT things. So when we start to NAT, we start to lose some of that visibility of where the traffic came from. The great bit about this is we start to fix those. We don't have to worry about that throughput with the endpoint pushing to that load balancer. We see around 40 gigabit per second throughput between that endpoint to that load balancer. So we really removed that bottleneck there. And then secondly, we're not doing any natting. So the traffic is transparently, essentially a bump in the wire, pushed to your appliances. So how do we actually get started and what are we actually starting to change? And that's a bit of the interesting one. So I'll run through how you're going to start to set it up. And now there are many different architectures. This is just one that I see as benefit to customers that I work with locally in the government space. So we'll start off with the basic deployment and then we'll work out how we make it a little bit more enterprise ready. So a lot of customers, they'll start with their VPC. They'll build an availability zone and maybe a private subnet. They'll build a transit gateway. They'll throw a few routes into that transit gateway to get things out to the internet via a gateway VPC. That'll have your attachment where your TGW or your transit gateway attaches with the ENI in a subnet. You'll then have your gateway load balance endpoint subnet. And finally, you'll have your public subnet. So that's where your NAT will sit typically, and that's your way of getting your traffic out to the internet. Then to the side, we'll have that firewall or that appliance VPC. Now you can put it in your gateway VPC, but for routing and for other features such as wanting to send traffic to an appliance that might be not from a VPC that might actually not be connected to your TGW and you want to keep a single fleet for your whole organisation, having it in that separate VPC might just be helpful. It also gives you that separate domain of managing things. So within there we'll throw an availability zone and a public subnet. We'll throw a couple of appliances. Now these appliances could have auto-scaling enabled on them. As I said, that new feature of multiple NICs for an EC2 instance is going to make it a lot easier to scale out those appliances. We can't be forgetting the gateway load balancer in that whole deployment. Now how do we actually start to get traffic out to our IGW and back again? So we're going to start with our source. The first thing our source will want to do is touch or go to that transit gateway. So our traffic is going to start to go out there. What we're going to have to do is make sure our route table is updated and it's going to send that essentially internet traffic, so that 0.0.0.0/0 to your transit gateway. From your transit gateway, you're going to start to push that traffic out to your TGW ENI, which is in your gateway VPC. So you're going to update that. Now, the next point it needs to go to is the endpoint, so your gateway load balancer endpoint. So within that subnet, you're going to have a route table that has that, again, 0.0.0.0/0 or your internet route. It's going to go to your gateway load balancer endpoint. Now, this is where we start to see a shift in where the traffic goes. So the traffic is going to go from that endpoint, bang, straight down to your instance, your security firewall, gateway, whatever product that you're going to use. Now, it goes down there on UDP 6081 from memory, and you need to be aware of that traffic and receiving traffic on that port through that protocol. So when you're building your security groups around your appliances, and I'll go through a few gotchas in the next slide, make sure your security groups are set up correctly. From there, your appliance is going to inspect it. It's going to send it back, and it doesn't actually really care about the route table. What the appliance will do is send it back to the load balancer, which will send it back to the endpoint. You're then going to send it from your endpoint to your NAT gateway, and from your route table, you're going to see a couple of updates here. So my gateway load balancer endpoint route table is going to have the internet direction out to the NAT, and it's going to have back to that spoke, back to the TGW there. So this is what you'll need to update there. From that public subnet, we're going to go out to the internet, and we're going to have two routes there. So a route out to the internet for that one. Now that's all well and good, but how do we actually do this in a multiple availability zone deployment? What you need to understand pretty quickly is that the gateway load balance endpoint at this stage is deployed into a single availability zone. So most customers I know run multiple availability zones and they'll have multiple spokes or workload accounts. What they're going to have to do is deploy some appliances in another availability zone and double up in that gateway so that you've got your transit gateway attached to another subnet in an availability zone, your gateway load balancer in another subnet, and another NAT deployed. And if you start to do that and update your route tables and have separate route tables for your TGW endpoint, that subnet and that route that it goes to, your gateway load balance endpoint, the second one in your other availability zone, and out at your NAT, you're going to be able to direct traffic, because there's a couple of interesting things that we do when we actually deploy the gateway load balancer endpoint. We keep traffic to the availability zone by default that the traffic came from. So if you have an instance from that source VPC in availability zone A, by default the traffic is going to stick in availability zone A. It's going to go to an appliance in availability zone A, and it's going to go out via the public subnet in availability zone A. Same with availability zone B. So you need to make sure you've got those routes accordingly, and you split your routes. You don't just have one big route for example, for your transit gateway attachment point. What you'll also notice is that if the appliance has gone down, or you have no appliances available in availability zone A behind the load balancer, it's going to start pushing traffic to availability zone B. If both availability zones go down, it will go back to availability zone A and fail forward. So what that means is it's going to keep pushing traffic. It's not going to stop until something comes back up, and then it'll reassess and point traffic. It'll keep pushing traffic until the session is also restarted. So it's a good thing to be aware of. So some common things to look out for. As I said, the gateway load balancer sends and receives traffic on UD port 6081 with the Geneve protocol. So if you're not sure what the Geneve protocol is, I recommend having a look and reading about it. It's a fantastic little white paper on that one. But it's basically your network virtualization overlay and encapsulation of the protocol. And it allows us to forward that traffic to those appliances. As I spoke about, the traffic will preference the same availability zone from the source to the destination as it goes through. You need to deploy multiple gateway load balancers in multiple subnets and AZs for redundancy. So be aware of that. If you deploy one at this stage, it will stick to a single availability zone. Hopefully, as they start to develop and work on this product, we will see some of those restrictions or configurations simplify down, but that's how it's deployed at this stage. With your appliance, you need to send the traffic back to the load balancer, and in particular the elastic or the network interface that the load balancer has in the availability zone that the appliance is deployed in. So if you go into your network interfaces, you'll be able to see that. Now, partner products, and I've worked with one at the moment, when you start to set this up, it actually has a plugin and actually works out this for you when you set the appliance up. So I can't speak for all partner products at this stage, but I do know that some are smart enough to be able to pick that up. And finally, the gateway load balancer, as I said, the endpoint doesn't need to be in the same VPC as the gateway load balancer. So if you have got traffic coming from another VPC, developers' VPCs that you want to keep separate, they're not on the same TGW, they're completely out, but you only want one fleet of load balancers, one fleet of appliances and keep things simple, you can do that quite easily, and you can deploy an endpoint in their account and point it to your load balancer in your centralized or your appliance VPC. So launch partners, as I said, there's quite a few out there, and there's quite a few products supporting it from day one. So I see a lot of customers use a number of these products here, so you shouldn't be limited. I initially set this up without using one of these products and just a simple Linux box using IP tables, inspecting the traffic and sending it back. It was a good way to work out how the network flows worked, but yeah, you can quite easily grab one of these partners and have your appliances inspecting your traffic. And finally, some helpful links. So there's some great technical blogs out there at the moment. If you want to have a look at the introduction to AWS Gateway Load Balancers, there's supported architecture platens. There's some really good, if you read through a few of these blogs, they have some links to some GitHub repos with some ability to deploy.
Is Gateway Load Balancer dependent on a VPCE or can you run it without one?
The question is a Gateway Load Balancer dependent on a VPCE or can you run one without one? No, you do need a VPCE. The traffic and the routes need to be pushed to that VPCE, so you do need it at this stage. So with the there's also some great how-to guides. So get into the console, have a play with it, stand it up. There's a CLI that is available. We'll include some of these links, but there's a great getting started video. Setting up the endpoint isn't as similar to how you've set up an endpoint before. So you do need to be aware of that. Have a look at the getting started videos on the Gateway Load Balancer. It'll talk you through setting that up. Unfortunately, we're a little bit limited on these lightning talks, so I can't run you through a full end-to-end deployment, but there's some great videos out there. If you do have questions, there is also some networking office hours on Twitch TV AWS. It is 1:30 PST time, so I do apologise for any Australians in the room. You can also get in contact with your local solution architects or AWS professional services as well if you're looking at setting this up within your organisation. And thank you very much.
Thanks to all our presenters for an excellent set of talks tonight. Coming up in a few days is AWS reInvent. This will be 3 weeks of non-stop learning, and we're actually broadcasting in some time zone friendly stuff for Australia. So make sure you register. It's free this year. It's our premier education conference, so you'll find some really, really great content. And I'd also recommend, get into the agenda and find those sessions that are running in our time zone. Now, as always, we'd like to hear what you'd like. Now, we've run a new format this month, so we've had a few lightning talks as opposed to our longer talks. Even if you just leave us a message in chat, please send us some feedback and tell us what you'd like to hear, if you'd like more lightning talks, or you prefer the longer format, or if there's some topics you'd like either us or one of our customers to cover, please let us know. And make sure you submit that feedback as well. You'll get asked in Meetup. We do read each and every bit of feedback you send us, so please keep doing so. And remember, friends don't let friends miss the AWS user group. Our word of mouth is our best way of advertising, so please tell your colleagues, tell your friends, tell your family. Some of them might care. But come along to AWS user group, and thank you very much. And this is our last user group for the year. So reInvent will be your next big dose of education and quality content. And we'll be joining you next year. We'll start up again in February. So really looking forward to having you all back then. But until then, enjoy the end of year, and we hope you all have a safe and happy holiday period. Thank you very much. We will be around in chat for a while yet, so if you've got any questions, comments, or other observations, hit us up there. But otherwise, we will see you in February. Thank you all.